We're continuing in the favorites of mine out of the book of Revelation, and then we're going to go backwards all the way to Genesis if I live long enough, and just hit some of the highlights of my favorite stories from the scriptures in these devotions. Let me do another Paul Harvey for you. A man and a woman are dating for a long period of time, and the man has a secret that he has never told his wife to be as he gets engaged to her. That is, he has, no matter how many times he washes them or what he washes them with, he has the smelliest feet in the world. And the woman has a secret she's been keeping from her husband to be, and the fact that she has the worst morning breath that you've ever smelled. So he has the worst smelly feet, she has the worst morning breath, and they're married. And for several days, everything goes fine because she makes sure to quickly slip off to the bathroom and rinse her mouth with mouthwash in the mornings. And he goes to sleep and makes sure that he covers his feet with socks and wears socks every night to bed, and keeps her from smelling his smelly feet. Well, one night, the man has an extremely restless night, and his socks come loose. And he wakes up and realizes his socks are no longer on his feet. And now the book of Revelation. And the punchline at the very end of the story, just like you would see one of Paul Harvey's little stories. But first of all, let me just share with you in Revelation chapter 10, there's something that a lot of people pass over and don't pay attention to. And that is that while John is writing things that he sees and hears in heaven, there is one thing that he does not record, and he is told not to record it. And that is the seven peals of thunder. Chapter 10, verses 3 and 4. You may want to go over there and look at that. You may want to look at what leads into that and what comes out of that, and speculate, like so many ministers have done, what is said or what happens during the seven peals of thunder, and why was John not allowed to write it down? Why is that a secret that God has kept from us? And who knows when it's going to be revealed, but John wasn't allowed to write it. Interesting speculation, so you may want to go look at that. John chapter 10, verses 3 and 4, and see what some of the speculators have said about that. Remember, it can only be divine speculation because God said to John, don't write it down. Don't write it down. But here's one of my favorite sections in the book of Revelation, and it's found in chapter 11. And I always title this one, when I preach it, Bad Breath. And that's why the sock and the morning breath story a minute ago. It tells us in in Revelation chapter 11, I will grant authority to two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days. 1,260 days. And they'll be clothed in sackcloth. So God is going to, during this tribulation time, the breaking of the seals, the sounding of the trumpets, he's going to have two witnesses, and they're going to preach and prophesy for 1,260 days. And if anyone wants to harm them during this 1,260 days, out of their mouths will flow a fire that will destroy anybody that's their enemy. So if they're preaching along and somebody comes along and says, we don't want you preaching that anymore, and they start to try to arrest them, these two witnesses will go, and fire will come out and destroy anyone that tries to harm them. If they send in a whole army, a fire will come out of the mouth of these two witnesses and devour the enemy. And when they finish their testimony, it tells us in verse 7, then there's going to be the great beast is going to come up out of the abyss, and he's going to desire to kill these two witnesses. But remember, their task is done. They've been able to use the fire out of their mouth to finish their task of 1,260 days. And the great beast comes out and kills them, and their bodies lie in the street. Now, I'm going to speculate a little bit here. They're left in the street and they're not allowed to be buried, because my belief is because Jesus was put in a tomb and in 3 days rose, they weren't going to let that happen again. So they wanted to be sure to not let God get the credit for resurrection from the dead like they did with Jesus. So these bodies are left to lie in the street for 3.5 days. Actually, they're planning on leaving them there for a lot longer than that. But anyway, they're left there for 3.5 days. And they're celebrating and they're having parties. And it's like Christmas. They're giving each other presents. And because of the communications that would be available in the days of the future as well as they are now, people around the world are watching these two witnesses lifeless in the streets. These had been God's spokesmen, and now they had been killed, and they weren't going to be able to rise from the dead, because we're going to leave them right out there in the street where everybody's going to watch them. So you can imagine this. NBC News, CBS, ABC, they're all going to be broadcasting. Well, they're still there. They're the two bodies. They said they were of God, but look, they're dead. And they're celebrating and having a good time because these two witnesses of God are dead. Except that as you read through chapter 11, you're going to find down around verse 11, but after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell on those who were watching them. Party was over. These two witnesses who had been able to kill anybody that came against them with the breath of their mouth, who had seemed to be lifeless and without any power, laying in the street and everybody celebrating and having a good time, they were back to life again. And it says that everybody was watching, and it says they heard a voice from heaven saying, "Come up here." Does that sound familiar to you? When John was told to come up here, and one day we'll be told to come up here. Come up here. And they went into heaven, into the cloud, and their enemies watched them. And in that hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell, and 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake. And the rest were terrified and gave glory to God in heaven. I love the story. I really do. I mean, just bad breath. Just breathe on your enemies and they die. When everybody thinks that they've killed you and you don't really speak for God, and that there really isn't a God, and they're celebrating, and all of the news media reporting they're still lying in the street, and all of a sudden they stand to their feet filled with God's power and rise into heaven. All right, you want to hear the rest of the story? So the husband wakes up and his socks are missing, and he turns to his wife and he says, "Did you take my socks?" And she turns around with her morning bad breath and says, "No." And he says, "You ate my socks." And that's the rest of the story. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.